The autumn afternoon sunlight streamed through the window of the small apartment in St. Louis. Margaret Wilson was helping her son Ryan with his homework while preparing dinner in the kitchen. The 12-year-old boy had his textbook spread out on the table, working on math problems, but occasionally showed signs of fatigue. "Hey, Mom," Ryan said, putting down his pencil and turning around. "Dad promised to take me to the zoo this weekend. Will you come with us?" Margaret stopped what she was doing and looked at her son. Ryan's cheeks seemed a little paler than usual. Over the past few weeks, his appetite had decreased and he lacked his previous energy. However, seeing her son's face as he looked forward to the promise with his father, she couldn't let her worry show. "Treasure your time with your father," Margaret smiled gently. "I have to work on Saturday, so you two have fun together." Since their divorce 3 years ago, Margaret had been working as a receptionist at a small accounting firm in the city. Though she wanted full-time work, considering Ryan's care, part-time was all she could manage. Her ex-husband David was a successful orthopedic surgeon who was financially well off, but she had won the custody battle. The judge had determined that living with his mother would be more stable for Ryan. Weekend visitation days were special for Ryan. David would take his son to expensive restaurants and buy him new toys and games. When Ryan returned, he would always excitedly tell his mother about the day's events. While Margaret was happy to see her son's joyful face, she had complex feelings about her ex-husband providing things she couldn't. "Are you happy being with me, Mom?" Ryan asked one evening in bed. "Of course," Margaret kissed her son's forehead. "I'm the happiest in the world. Dad lives with his new wife, but he still loves me, right? Your father loves you very much. That will never change." Ryan smiled with relief and closed his eyes. Margaret gazed at her sleeping son's face for a while. Life in this small apartment wasn't wealthy, but their time together, just the two of them, was a treasure beyond anything else. However, shadows began to fall over those peaceful days around the end of October. When Ryan came home from school, he would want to lie down immediately. He could only eat about half his meals, and his previous liveliness was gradually disappearing. "Something's wrong with my son," Margaret consulted the pediatrician. "He gets tired easily and has no appetite." The doctor conducted a thorough examination and recommended blood tests. While waiting for the results, Margaret spent sleepless nights filled with anxiety. Ryan continued to study and try to play with friends, but in his mother's eyes, the changes in her son were clearly visible. She also contacted David about Ryan's condition. Her ex-husband, being a doctor himself, explained the importance of waiting for test results and tried to reassure Margaret. However, his new wife Jessica worked as a nurse, and when Margaret heard the two of them having professional discussions about her son's symptoms, she felt left out. On the day the blood test results came back, Margaret visited the hospital with her son. The moment she saw the doctor's serious expression, her heart began pounding violently. Ryan held his mother's hand tightly while listening to the doctor's explanation. When the diagnosis of acute lymphoblastic leukemia was given, Margaret's world changed in an instant. However, she was determined never to show tears in front of her son. Though only 12, Ryan understood the situation and smiled as if to encourage his mother. "It's okay, Mom. I'm strong." After the diagnosis, Margaret Wilson's life began to revolve around the hospital. The oncology department at St. Louis Children's Hospital became like a second home to her. When Ryan's treatment began, Margaret reduced her work from part-time to even fewer hours, prioritizing time by her son's side. Due to the side effects of chemotherapy, Ryan's beautiful blonde hair gradually fell out. To comfort her son, who was initially shocked seeing himself in the mirror, Margaret shaved her head too. "Now we look like twins," Ryan smiled softly. "Yes. The most handsome twins in the world," Margaret gently placed her hand on her son's head. About 3 months after treatment began, Ryan's condition showed temporary improvement. The doctors gave cautiously hopeful prognosis, and Margaret showed relief for the first time. During this period, David and Jessica also began visiting the hospital frequently. As a doctor, David discussed his son's treatment in detail with the attending physician and suggested seeking second opinions. Through his professional knowledge and connections, Ryan was able to receive more advanced treatment. Margaret was grateful to her ex-husband, but at the same time, she was tormented by anxiety about whether she was doing enough for her son. "You're doing more than enough," David told Margaret one day in the hospital corridor. "For Ryan, having you by his side is the best medicine." These words brought tears to Margaret's eyes. After the divorce, there had been a tense atmosphere between them, but facing their son's illness, the former couple had begun to cooperate. However, as spring passed into summer, Ryan's condition began to deteriorate again. He had persistent fevers and could barely eat. Blood test values continued to worsen, and Dr. Brian Chen, the attending physician, gathered the family to tell them the harsh reality. "Unfortunately, the current treatment methods are not showing effectiveness. We've considered other options, but in Ryan's case," Dr. Chen chose his words carefully, "it may be time to consider transitioning to palliative care." Margaret felt like she couldn't breathe. It took time to understand what palliative care meant. It meant giving up treatment. "There must be other methods," Margaret desperately pleaded. "Experimental treatments, overseas treatments, anything, please try everything." David placed his hand on his wife's shoulder. As a doctor, he understood the severity of the situation. "Margaret, we've done our best. Now let's think about easing Ryan's suffering." That night, Margaret spent time alone at Ryan's bedside. Her son slept most of the time due to medication, but occasionally woke up and smiled at his mother. "Mom, it hurts," Ryan said in a small voice. "I know, sweetheart. I'll talk to the doctor." Margaret held her son's hand. "Let's get you stronger pain medication." The next day, Margaret consulted Dr. Chen about pain control. "Please stop my son's pain. I can't bear to watch. Use stronger medication. Make it so he doesn't feel pain." The doctor showed understanding and promised to adjust the morphine dosage. However, Ryan's suffering continued. He would wake up in the middle of the night in pain, calling his mother's name, his voice echoing in the hospital room. David began visiting the hospital late on weekday nights too. Between his busy schedule as an orthopedic surgeon, he made time for his son. However, due to visiting hour restrictions and the awkward relationship with his ex-wife, the time he could spend with Ryan was limited. One day, David was checking something at the nurse's station. As a doctor, he was using his position within the hospital to access his son's medical records. The nurses who saw this understood it was a physician worried about his son as a father. At the end of August, Ryan's condition rapidly deteriorated. He became unconscious for longer periods, and his waking hours grew shorter. Margaret stayed overnight at the hospital, never leaving her son's side. "Mom, if I go to heaven, will I be able to see Grandpa?" Ryan asked in a weak voice. "I'm sure you will. Grandpa is waiting for you," Margaret answered, holding back tears. "Will you come later too, Mom?" "Much later. After you've had lots of fun with Grandpa." Ryan closed his eyes with relief. During the first weekend of September, Margaret was spending time alone in her son's hospital room. David was supposed to visit on Saturday morning, but couldn't come due to emergency surgery. Except for nurses occasionally checking in, mother and son spent quiet time together. "Mom, thank you," Ryan suddenly opened his eyes and said. "For doing so many things for me. I should be thanking you. Having you here makes me the happiest mother in the world. I was the happiest son in the world too." Those were the last words Ryan left for his mother. The 12-year-old boy quietly passed away. Margaret continued holding her son's hand, remaining in the silence where time seemed to stop. When the nurse entered the room and confirmed Ryan's death, Margaret finally accepted reality. She kissed her son's forehead and held his small body. David received the call just after finishing surgery. When he rushed to the hospital, everything was over. He stared at his son's body, deeply regretting that he couldn't be there at the final moment. On the day of the funeral, many people gathered to remember Ryan. Margaret wore a black dress, quietly treasuring memories with her son in her heart. David and Jessica also attended, and her ex-husband spoke about his love for his son in a eulogy. 3 weeks had passed since Ryan's death. Margaret Wilson was trying to gradually return to daily life while facing the reality of her son's death. She had returned to work at the accounting firm and begun living alone in the empty apartment. On a Tuesday evening in October, Margaret finished work at 4 o'clock as usual and headed home. The autumn sunlight was already beginning to slant, casting long shadows across the apartment parking lot. The moment she got out of her car, she noticed 2 patrol cars parked in front of her apartment. Her heart began pounding violently. Had some incident occurred? Maybe a neighbor had been in an accident. Margaret hurried up the apartment stairs. "Are you Margaret Wilson?" When she turned around, she saw 2 people in dark navy suits walking toward her. One was a tall man, the other a woman. "Yes, that's me," Margaret answered with a confused expression. "Is something wrong?" The tall man stepped forward. "I'm Detective Harris. This is Detective Martinez. We have some questions for you. Is there some incident in the neighborhood?" Margaret looked around. "Is there something I can help with?" The 2 detectives looked at each other. Detective Harris took a deep breath. "Margaret Wilson, you're under arrest for murder." Margaret's mind went blank. She thought she had misheard. "Excuse me. What did you say?" "Murder charges," Detective Martinez said, taking out handcuffs. "The victim is your son, Ryan Wilson." Margaret felt her knees about to give way. She put her hand against the apartment wall to support herself. My son died of leukemia. In the hospital. There were doctors and nurses. I didn't do anything." Detective Harris continued in a calm tone. "Blood tests performed after Ryan's death detected lethal amounts of muscle relaxants. This drug doesn't occur naturally in the body. It was intentionally administered." "Muscle relaxants?" Margaret shook her head. "I don't know anything about that. I've never even touched such a thing. It's a drug that's difficult for non-medical personnel to obtain," Detective Martinez explained. "However, your ex-husband is a doctor and had access to the hospital." "David?" Margaret was confused. "He loved his son. He would never do such a thing. We believe you carried out euthanasia because you couldn't bear to see your son's suffering," Detective Harris said. "We also have recordings of you pleading with doctors at the hospital to stop my son's pain." Tears filled Margaret's eyes. "I was just asking them to reduce my son's pain. I meant regular pain medication. I never once thought about killing him." "Put your hands behind your back," Detective Martinez ordered. "Please wait," Margaret desperately pleaded. "This is a mistake. I loved my son. I loved him more than anything in the world. It's absolutely impossible that I would harm my son." But the cold handcuffs were placed on her wrists. She could see neighbors watching from their windows. Margaret felt dizzy with shame and despair. "You have the right to remain silent," Detective Harris began reading her legal rights. "Anything you say can be used against you as evidence in court." Margaret was listening but not listening to the detective's words. In her head, her son's last words kept repeating, "I was the happiest son in the world too." On the way to the patrol car, Margaret looked back. She saw her apartment door open with uniformed police officers going inside. "We also have a search warrant," Detective Martinez explained. "We're conducting a search for evidence." "Evidence?" "There's no evidence in my house," Margaret said in a trembling voice. The journey to the police station felt short. While being led to the interrogation room, Margaret felt the gazes of the surrounding police officers. In their eyes was the cold stare of people looking at a mother who killed her own child. "Please call a lawyer," Margaret said in a shaking voice. "I need a lawyer." Detective Harris nodded. "Of course. But before that, we'd like you to hear the results of the house search." 30 minutes later, Detective Martinez returned to the interrogation room. In her hands was a small bottle in a clear plastic bag. "This was found in your bedroom closet, in a box in the back." Detective Martinez placed the evidence on the table. An empty bottle of muscle relaxant. "The label is still there." Margaret stared at the bottle. It had the name of a drug she'd never seen before. "This isn't mine," she shook her head. "I've never seen it. I don't know why it's in my house." "Is there anyone besides you who could enter your house?" Detective Harris asked. Margaret thought. "My ex-husband David has a spare key. For emergencies." "But he wouldn't." "Are you saying your ex-husband killed your son and is trying to frame you?" Detective Martinez frowned. "No, that's not." Margaret was confused. "David loved his son. But I also don't know anything about this medicine." The two detectives looked at each other again. There was a large contradiction between Margaret's desperate claims and the physical evidence found. "Ma'am," Detective Harris said in a slightly gentler tone, "we can understand how painful it was to watch your son suffer. The feeling of wanting to ease the pain of your own child suffering from a terminal illness." "No," Margaret pleaded through tears. "I wanted my son to live until the very end. Even if there was pain, I wanted to be with him for even one more minute, one more second. Why can't you understand that?" Her desperate cry echoed in the interrogation room. Other police officers in the hallway also stopped when they heard that voice. Detective Martinez looked at her colleague. There was genuine anguish in the mother's voice that couldn't be faked. However, the evidence was clear. The blood test results, the drug bottle found at home, and the recorded plea to stop her son's pain. "We'll refrain from further questions until your lawyer arrives," Detective Harris said. Margaret buried her head in her hands and sat down. Not only had she lost her beloved son, but now she was being falsely accused of killing that very son. Could there be any greater despair? The clock on the interrogation room wall pointed to 8 o'clock in the evening. Rain had begun falling outside, with raindrops streaming down the window glass. Margaret stared beyond the window while remembering Ryan's smile. "Please tell us the truth, ma'am," Detective Martinez said finally. "For your son's sake too, you should tell the truth." "The truth is," Margaret looked up and said, "that I loved my son. That's all there is." The two detectives left the room. Margaret was left alone in the cold interrogation room. Margaret was released on $50,000 bail. She used her son's life insurance money to hire a lawyer and desperately tried to prove her innocence. Her assigned attorney was Linda Fisher, an experienced female criminal defense lawyer. "This is a case prosecuted on circumstantial evidence alone," Attorney Fisher explained to Margaret in her office. "Blood test results, drugs found at your home, and recorded statements. However, there's no direct eyewitness testimony." "I'm innocent," Margaret pleaded through tears. "I loved my son. I never thought about killing him." Attorney Fisher nodded. "I believe your words. I'm currently examining the hospital records in detail. There must be some inconsistency." A week later, Attorney Fisher made an important discovery. While scrutinizing Ryan's medical records, she found something strange in the blood test records. "Something's odd," the lawyer explained to Margaret. "The blood test that was supposedly performed after your son's death, the times recorded by the technician who performed the test and the doctor who reported the results don't match." Margaret leaned forward. "What do you mean?" "The blood test technician recorded completing the test at 3 p.m. However, the report stating that muscle relaxants were detected was written with a 1 p.m. timestamp. The post-mortem test results were created before the test was actually performed." Based on this discrepancy, Attorney Fisher began interviewing the hospital nurses. Emily Chon, the nurse who witnessed Ryan's final moments, gave important testimony. On the day Ryan passed away, his mother was alone in the room, Emily testified. His father couldn't come due to emergency surgery. But there was something strange. What was it? Attorney Fisher asked. After Ryan died, Dr. Chen immediately ordered blood collection. Normally we get family consent first, but that day was different. He said, special testing is needed. Dr. Chen said that. Yes. Also, the blood test results came back faster than usual. Normally it takes several days, but the next day we had results. Based on this testimony, Attorney Fisher began investigating Dr. Chen. Then, a shocking fact came to light. Dr. Chen and David Wilson were college classmates and continued to maintain a close relationship. This is not a coincidence, Attorney Fisher reported to Margaret. We need to investigate the relationship between your ex-husband and Dr. Chen. Investigation by a private detective revealed even more shocking facts. After the divorce, David harbored deep resentment toward Margaret. Losing custody had wounded his pride, and he felt strong dissatisfaction about the limitations on his time with his son. The detective gathered testimony from David's colleagues. Dr. David truly loved his son, but his resentment toward his ex-wife was also deep, testified an orthopedic surgery nurse. After his son died, he was bitter, saying, "Margaret monopolized my son, and I wanted to spend more time with my son." Decisive evidence was found in David's office. His computer's search history contained massive amounts of keywords like muscle relaxants, undetectable drugs, and falsifying blood tests. However, the biggest breakthrough in uncovering the truth came from an unexpected source, Dr. Chen's pangs of conscience. One night, Dr. Chen visited Attorney Fisher's office. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. "I've done something irreversible," Dr. Chen said in a trembling voice. "David was threatening me." "What do you mean?" Attorney Fisher asked. 5 years ago, I committed medical malpractice. I overlooked a patient's drug allergy and caused serious side effects. David helped cover it up. It wasn't reported to the hospital, and I was able to keep my medical license. Dr. Chen continued. David used that debt of gratitude to demand that I falsify blood test results. He said he would frame Margaret as a murderer. Why would he do such a thing? He had lost normal judgment due to the pain of losing his son and his resentment toward Margaret. He said it was revenge for monopolizing my son. I tried to refuse, but he threatened to expose the medical malpractice. Dr. Chen's confession revealed the full scope of the conspiracy. After his son's death, David had Dr. Chen create false blood test results. Then, using his spare key, he broke into Margaret's home and hid the empty muscle relaxant bottle. Further investigation revealed that David had illegally obtained muscle relaxants from the hospital's pharmacy department. He had abused his position as a doctor to falsify records and steal the drugs. The recorded statement, "Stop the pain," was also misused by ignoring the context, Attorney Fisher explained. A normal mother's words upon seeing her son's suffering were interpreted as motive for murder. When new evidence was submitted to police, the investigation took a dramatic turn. Based on Dr. Chen's testimony and physical evidence, David Wilson was arrested. At the moment of arrest, David resisted violently. "I loved my son. Margaret was monopolizing my son. I had more right to spend time with my son." His new wife Jessica was deeply shocked by her husband's arrest. "I can't believe it. David's love for his son was real. But I had no idea his resentment toward Margaret was so deep." After learning the truth, Jessica immediately began divorce proceedings. "I don't want to be seen as an accomplice to murder. Besides, what he did is unforgivable." The murder charges against Margaret were officially dropped. However, the wounds to her heart ran deep. Not only had she lost her beloved son, but she had been falsely accused of killing that very son, and the conspiracy had been orchestrated by her ex-husband. "Why did David do this to me?" Margaret asked Attorney Fisher. "We were supposed to be cooperating when it came to our son." "Resentment and grief can drive people insane," the lawyer answered. "He turned the pain of losing his son into revenge against you. It's behavior that can't be explained rationally." David was charged with perjury, tampering with evidence, and illegal use of drugs. His medical license was also revoked, and a long prison sentence was virtually certain. Dr. Chen was also charged with falsifying medical records and perjury, but considering that he had turned himself in and the circumstances of being threatened, he received a suspended sentence. However, his medical license was suspended, and he was effectively banished from the medical field. When the truth was revealed, Margaret felt complex emotions. Along with the relief of being proven innocent, she was devastated by the reality that her son's father had harbored such hatred toward her. "Ryan," Margaret murmured toward her son's photograph. "Your father was sick. I think his love for you was real. But that love went in the wrong direction." A year later, Margaret was visiting the cemetery where Ryan rested. The small gravestone was inscribed with, "Beloved son Ryan Wilson, thank you for your angelic smile." She placed a bouquet of white roses at the grave and sat down quietly. "Ryan, how are you doing?" Margaret spoke gently toward her son's gravestone. "Mom is receiving counseling now. After that incident, I couldn't sleep well. But I'm getting better little by little." The autumn wind caressed her cheeks. Margaret quietly reflected on her memories with her son. The hospital stay, his last words, and the nightmarish days that had befallen her. David received a 3-year prison sentence for perjury and tampering with evidence. His medical license was permanently revoked, and even after release, he could never work in medicine again. Jessica finalized their divorce and returned to her hometown in Texas. "Your father was sick," Margaret placed her hand on the gravestone. "I think his love for you was real. But that love became twisted. It's sad." Dr. Chen received a medical license suspension and now works in research at a medical equipment manufacturer. After the incident, he sent a letter to Margaret. "I did something irreversible and am deeply sorry. I sincerely apologize to you and Ryan." Margaret wrote back to that letter. "You were also a victim. I can understand succumbing to David's threats. I'm grateful that you told the truth." From across the cemetery, she could see a young mother walking hand in hand with a small boy. The boy was about Ryan's age, talking happily to his mother about something. Margaret smiled. "Seeing that child reminds me of you," Margaret murmured. "You used to hold my hand the same way and tell me all sorts of stories." After the case was resolved, Margaret received support from many people. Her colleagues at the accounting firm welcomed her back warmly, and the apartment residents continued to treat her the same way. Most of all, encouraging words from the hospital nurses who had fought alongside her during her son's illness touched her heart. "Ryan's mother's love was genuine," said Nurse Emily. "That child was able to remain peaceful until the end because his mother was there with him." Margaret also found a new job. She helps with counseling for parents of sick children at the Patient Family Support Center at the Children's Hospital. She wanted to use her experience to support people in similar circumstances. "Another new family came today," Margaret reported to the gravestone. "A 7-year-old girl got leukemia, and her mother is very worried. When I told her about my experience with you, she felt a little better." The setting sun began casting long shadows across the cemetery. Margaret stood up and gently stroked the gravestone. "You taught me what a real parent is," Margaret smiled. "It's not blood relations or financial resources. A real parent is someone who can stay with their child until the very end." "Mom, thank you." In the sound of the wind, she thought she heard Ryan's voice. Margaret took a deep breath and left the cemetery. On the way home, she remembered her promise to her son. Much later, After you've had lots of fun with Grandpa. Not yet. Margaret still had things to do. She needed to pass on to others the meaning of love that her son had taught her. In the car, Margaret hummed a tune. It was a lullaby that Ryan had loved. Her son always used to beg, "Sing that song." "Ryan, I love you," Margaret whispered toward the sky. "Forever." In the autumn evening sky, a single star began to shine.